For 5 years, my adopted son, whom I had saved, held me prisoner in his own luxurious home. I was his secret servant, forced to eat the scraps from his plate and remain invisible to his wealthy guests. He thought he had broken my spirit and that I would live forever in the shadow of his cruelty, but he didn't account for one accident, a caterer's forgotten phone, which became my only window to the world. This is the story of how one innocent mistake gave me the weapon I needed to destroy his perfect world from the inside out. Like this video, and right where you are watching us from, we will be happy to send you our regards. Stay with us. Don't miss what's coming next. They call me Clara. It's a good, solid name, the kind you'd give to a ship or a queen. It speaks of strength, of a certain quiet dignity. But in the small, shadowed corners of my life, in the house that had become my world and my cage, it was not a name spoken with respect. It was a sound, a summons, a single sharp syllable that meant my master required my attention. And my master, the architect of my quiet daily misery, was the boy I had raised, the boy I had saved, my adopted son, Vincent. To the outside world, the world that existed beyond the meticulously trimmed hedges of our suburban Atlanta home, Vincent was a pillar of the community. He was handsome, successful, a self-made man who had built a lucrative tech company from the ground up. He was generous, donating to all the right charities, his name printed in the glossy programs of all the right fundraising galas. He was the perfect son, the one who had taken in his aging, widowed mother, giving her a beautiful home in which to live out her golden years. This was the story he told, the beautiful, polished fiction he presented to the world. The truth, like so many truths, was a much uglier, more complicated thing. The truth was that I was not a guest in his home. I was his prisoner, and his darkest, most well-kept secret. Our days were a ritual of quiet, soul-crushing humiliation, a liturgy of my own slow erasure. My world was confined to the small, gray bedroom at the back of the house and the sterile, silent kitchen where I prepared his meals. I was not allowed in the main living areas, not when he had guests, which was often. "Your presence is depressing, Clara," he had told me once. His voice not cruel, just matter of fact, like a man discussing a piece of furniture that no longer fit the decor. "People come here to see success, to feel inspired. The sight of a frail, old woman reminds them of decay. It's bad for business." So I would remain in my room listening to the muffled sounds of his laughter, the clinking of wine glasses, a ghost in my own home. My meals were another part of the ritual. I did not eat with him. After he had finished his dinner, whatever was left on his plate, a half-eaten piece of salmon, a few spears of asparagus, the crust of a good piece of bread, would be scraped onto a small, chipped plate and left for me on the kitchen counter. It was his way of reminding me of my place, of my utter dependence on him. I was a dog, waiting for the scraps from my master's table. And the most shameful part, the part that burns in my memory like a hot coal, is that I would eat it. Every last bite. Because to refuse would be to protest, and to protest would be to invite his anger. And his anger was a cold, quiet, and terrifying thing. This life, this slow, daily death of the spirit, had been my reality for 5 years. But it hadn't always been this way. I remembered the boy he was, the fierce, terrified, and brilliant 12-year-old I had first met in a crowded foster care group home. I was a social worker then, a woman who had dedicated her life to mending the broken pieces of other people's families. He was the brokenest child I had ever seen, a boy who had been passed from one bad situation to another, his spirit encased in a thick, protective shell of anger and mistrust. But I saw through it. I saw the brilliant mind, the loyal heart, the desperate, aching need for a place to call home. My husband had been gone for years, and my own biological children, 2 successful daughters who lived on the other side of the country, were grown and gone. I was alone. And so was he. I had fought for him, navigated the bureaucratic labyrinth of the foster care system, and brought him home. For a few brief, beautiful years, we were a family. I nurtured his brilliance, celebrated his successes, and slowly, patiently earned his trust. He called me Mom, and in return, he gave my quiet, empty life a new and profound purpose. But as he grew older, as his success in the world began to build, something changed. The gratitude was replaced by a kind of resentful entitlement. The love was replaced by a cold, transactional sense of duty. After I retired, After I sold my own small home and gave him the proceeds to invest for me, the transformation was complete. The boy I had saved became the man who would enslave me. The home he had promised would be our shared sanctuary became my prison. And the most terrifying part was that I had allowed it to happen. I had traded my freedom, my dignity, my very self, for the quiet, desperate hope that if I was just a little smaller, a little quieter, a little less of a burden, the boy I had once loved would return. It was a fool's hope, and I was about to be reminded of that in the most brutal way imaginable. The house itself was a co-conspirator in my misery. It was a beautiful structure, a modern masterpiece of glass and steel and polished concrete, the kind of home featured in glossy architecture magazines. Vincent had designed it himself, and it was a perfect reflection of its creator, cold, precise, and utterly devoid of warmth. There were no family photographs on the walls, no comfortable clutter, no evidence of a life actually being lived. It was a showroom, a stage set, and every gleaming empty surface seemed to mock me, reflecting back a distorted, diminished version of myself. The silence in the house was the most oppressive feature of all. It was not a peaceful silence. It was a managed, curated silence, an absence of sound that was a constant reminder of my own invisibility. Sounds were a privilege reserved for Vincent. The sound of his expensive Italian shoes on the polished concrete floors, the sound of his low, confident voice on business calls, the sound of the classical music he would play at a low, controlled volume in the evenings. My own sounds, the soft shuffle of my slippers, the quiet click of my bedroom door, were intrusions to be minimized, lest they disturb the master of the house. Our mornings were a silent, one-act play of my subservience. I would wake before dawn, in the small gray and windowless room at the back of the house that had been designated as mine. I had to be in the kitchen by 6 to prepare his breakfast. It was always the same. A complex green juice for which I had to wash and chop a dozen different vegetables, the slightest bruise on a piece of kale earning a look of silent, cold disapproval. 2 perfectly poached eggs cooked to the exact second of his preference, a skill that had taken me months of anxious trial and error to master. And a single piece of toast from a loaf of artisanal bread I had to fetch from a specific bakery on the other side of town, twice a week. The entire process was a high-wire act of anxiety. A broken yolk, a piece of toast that was a shade too dark, could result in a day of his cold, punishing silence, a withdrawal of his presence that was somehow more terrifying than any shouted word. My only illusion of freedom, my only sanctuary within the larger prison was a small neglected patch of earth behind the guest house. Vincent allowed me to tend to it. My own secret garden. It was there with my hands in the dirt, surrounded by the stubborn, beautiful life of my tomato plants and my herbs, that I felt the ghost of the woman I used to be. The social worker. The woman with a purpose. The woman who had a life that was her own. I would spend hours there, pulling weeds, talking to my plants, the sun on my back, a small stolen comfort. But even this small freedom was conditional. I was not allowed to be seen there if he was entertaining, and the produce I grew, the beautiful, vibrant vegetables I nurtured from seed, were not for me. They were for his elaborate, healthy meals. I was merely the unpaid gardener, cultivating the ingredients for my master's table. How had I come to this? How had the strong, independent woman who had raised 2 daughters and dedicated her life to helping broken children become this ghost? The memory was a constant dull ache. It had happened so gradually, so masterfully, that I had not realized the bars of the cage were being built around me until the door had already been locked. It had all started with the investment. After I retired, I sold my small, comfortable home, the home where my daughters had grown up, the home that was filled with my own history. Vincent, who was by then already a rising star in the tech world, had sat me down in my own living room and had spoken to me with such loving, persuasive concern. "Mom," he'd said, taking my hands in his, "this money from the house, your pension, it's not enough to last. You need to make it grow. Let me invest it for you. Let me take care of you for once. You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else." I had wept with gratitude. My son, my brilliant, successful son, wanted to take care of me. I gave him everything, the entire proceeds from the sale of my life, and I moved in with him into this beautiful, modern house he was building. The lie I told my own daughters was that I was living with him as an independent partner, that my money was my own. The truth, that I had handed him my entire financial identity, was a shame too great to admit. On my stilted weekly phone calls with them, with Vincent listening from the other room to ensure I stuck to the script, I would perform the role of the happy, fulfilled retiree. "Oh, it's wonderful, honey," I'd say, my voice a bright false thing. "Vincent is so good to me. I have everything I could ever need." The lie was a poison, isolating me from the only people in the world who might have been able to save me. But my shame and my deep, misguided desire to protect the perfect image of the son I had saved was a wall they could not penetrate. I was alone, and I had built the walls of my own prison. The quiet rhythm of my morning in the garden was shattered by the sound of Vincent's voice calling my name from the back porch. "Clara." The single word was not a request but a summons, and I felt the familiar cold clench of anxiety in my stomach. I stood up, brushing the dark, rich soil from my hands, and walked towards the house, towards him, leaving the small sunlit patch of my freedom behind. He was standing in the kitchen, already dressed for his day in one of his impeccably tailored suits, a tablet in his hand. He did not look at me, his eyes fixed on the screen. "I am hosting a dinner party this evening," he announced, his tone the same one he used when dictating instructions to his personal assistant. "A fundraiser for the Children's Hospital Foundation. It is a very important event. Several of my key investors will be present, as well as some prominent city council members. Everything must be perfect." "Of course," I said, my voice the quiet, neutral murmur I had perfected. "I have compiled a list of tasks for you," he continued, still not looking at me. He swiped his finger across the screen and then turned the tablet towards me. The list was long and detailed, a meticulous blueprint for my day of humiliation. I was to polish the silverware, the heavy, ornate set he had inherited from a grandmother he barely knew, the same silverware I was never permitted to eat with. I was to wash and iron the fine Belgian linen napkins. I was to go to my garden and cut the best of my roses and my hydrangeas and create a series of tasteful, minimalist floral arrangements for the dining room and the foyer. And I was to prepare a tray of canapes, the ingredients for which were on a grocery list he had already prepared. I read the list, each item a small, deliberate nail in the coffin of my own dignity. He was not just asking me to be a servant. He was asking me to take the few things that were still mine, my time, my skill in the garden, and use them to decorate the life from which I was excluded. He scrolled to the bottom of the list, to the final brutal instruction. "The guests will begin to arrive at 7 o'clock, he said, his voice flat and final. "By that time, your work will be complete, and you will, of course, remain in your room. You will be silent, and you will stay out of sight. The caterers will be here to handle the main course and the service." He finally looked up at me, his eyes cold and devoid of any emotion. "There are to be no distractions. Am I clear?" "Yes, Vincent," I whispered, the words a familiar taste of ash in my mouth. "Perfectly clear." He gave a curt, satisfied nod, turned and walked out of the house, leaving me alone in the vast, silent kitchen with my list of instructions. I stood there for a long time, the tablet still in my hand, and I felt a despair so profound, so heavy, it was a physical weight, pressing the very air from my lungs. This was my life. I was the secret, unpaid, and invisible scullery maid for my own son's lavish life, a ghost who was only allowed to be corporeal when there was work to be done. As I began the first of my humiliating tasks, polishing the heavy, ornate silver, a memory sharp and painful ambushed me. It was a memory of another party, in another life. Vincent's 13th birthday. We were in my small, cluttered, and happy home, the one I had sold to fund his ambition. The house was filled with the chaotic, joyful noise of a dozen teenage boys. I had spent a week preparing, baking his favorite chocolate cake, making homemade pizzas. I remembered him in the middle of it all, his face alight with a pure, uncomplicated joy, and he had come over to me, thrown his arms around my waist, and in front of all his friends he had said, "Thanks, Mom." This is the best party ever. The contrast between that memory, that boy, and the cold, cruel man who now demanded my invisibility was a form of psychological torture. The most painful task was cutting the flowers from my garden. I walked out into my small sanctuary, the shears feeling heavy and alien in my hand. My roses, which were my pride and joy, had never been more beautiful, their deep, velvety red petals covered in the morning dew. They were the one thing in this life that I had created and nurtured, the one thing that felt truly mine. And now I had to cut them down, to sacrifice them, to serve as a brief, beautiful decoration for a party I was forbidden to attend. As I snipped the first perfect bloom from its stem, I felt a tear, hot and silent, trace a path down my cheek. It was as if I was cutting down a part of myself, arranging the flowers for my own funeral. By 6:30, my work was done. The house was immaculate. The silver gleamed. The flowers, my beautiful sacrificed flowers, stood in their minimalist vases, their vibrant life a stark, painful contrast to the cold, sterile perfection of the rooms. The canapes were arranged on a silver platter in the refrigerator. I had done my job. I was a good and obedient ghost. I retreated to my small, gray room at the back of the house and closed the door. The clock on my nightstand ticked, each second a slow, steady beat counting down to the beginning of my nightly imprisonment. At precisely 7 o'clock, I heard the first faint chime of the doorbell, the sound of the first guest arriving. I heard Vincent's voice, warm and charming, welcoming them in. I closed my eyes and I prayed, not for rescue, not for a miracle, but simply for the strength to endure another night of being nothing. I sat in the silence of my small gray room, a prisoner listening to the sounds of my own execution. The party on the other side of the door was in full swing. I could hear the muffled waves of laughter, the sophisticated clinking of crystal glasses, the confident booming voice of my son Vincent as he held court. Each sound was a separate, exquisite form of torture, a vibrant testament to the life from which I was completely and utterly excluded. I was a ghost in this house, a non-person whose only function was to remain unheard, unseen, and unfelt. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands clasped in my lap, and I practiced the art of becoming nothing. Hours passed. The sounds of the party began to ebb, the waves of laughter growing farther apart. I heard the front door open and close, the polite goodbyes, the purr of expensive cars pulling away from the curb. Finally, after the last guest had departed, a new silence fell over the house. It was not the peaceful silence of an evening's end, but the tense, waiting silence that followed one of Vincent's performances. I waited. I knew what was coming. A sharp, single knock rattled my door. I stood up, smoothed the front of my simple dress and opened it. He stood there, a vision of success in his tailored tuxedo, a slight flush of expensive wine on his cheeks. He was holding a plate. It was one of his own dinner plates, the fine, minimalist porcelain he used for his guests. On it was a collection of half-eaten, discarded delicacies from the caterers, a single sad-looking shrimp, a smeared remnant of some exotic pâté, a few broken crackers, the scraps from his guests' plates. The party was a great success, he said, his voice a cool, detached monotone. He held the plate out to me. This is for you. The caterers have left. After you've eaten, you will clean the kitchen. I want it spotless by the time I come down in the morning. It was a new, breathtaking low in our shared history of my humiliation. I was no longer just the dog waiting for scraps from his table. I was now the creature that fed on the garbage of his entire pack. The insult was so profound, so utterly dehumanizing, that for a fleeting, beautiful second, I felt a surge of pure, violent rage. I imagined snatching the plate from his hand and smashing it against the wall, a glorious explosion of porcelain and shrimp, and my own suppressed fury. But the impulse died as quickly as it had been born. 40 years as a social worker, a lifetime of de-escalating the anger of others, and 5 years of surviving my son's cold, quiet tyranny had beaten the fight out of me. To protest, to rage, would only result in a punishment far worse than this. A week of his silent, withering contempt, a month of even smaller portions of food. My spirit, once so strong, was a trained, caged animal, and it knew better than to bite the hand that held the key. My own hand, trembling with a mixture of rage and shame, reached out and took the plate. "Thank you, Vincent," I whispered. He gave a curt, satisfied nod and walked away, leaving me with the discarded remnants of his perfect evening. I ate the food, each bite a fresh humiliation, a new layer of self-loathing. Then, as ordered, I went to the kitchen. The beautiful, professional space was a disaster zone of dirty glasses, smeared plates, and half-empty bottles. The catering staff had done the bare minimum, leaving the real work, the scullery maid's work, for me. I began to clean, my movements slow and robotic, my mind a quiet, empty space. I worked for over an hour, restoring the kitchen to its showroom-level perfection. It was as I was wiping down the final gleaming countertop that I saw it. Sitting next to the sink, half hidden behind the coffee maker, was a cell phone. It was not Vincent's sleek, minimalist device. This one was cheaper, encased in a bright pink glittery case. One of the young women from the catering staff, in her haste to leave, must have forgotten it. And in the vast, silent, and oppressive world of my prison, this small, forgotten object, this simple connection to the outside world, felt as strange and as powerful as a fallen star. I stood in the silent, gleaming kitchen, the forgotten cell phone a small, alien object on the vast expanse of the marble countertop. My first instinct, the instinct of a woman who had been conditioned to be invisible, was to do nothing. I was to leave it where it lay. Vincent would find it in the morning, and he would handle it. To touch it, to move it, to in any way engage with this object from the outside world felt like a transgression, a violation of the unspoken rules of my existence. My role was to clean the stage, not to interact with the props. But something held me there. I looked at the phone, at its cheap, glittery pink case, a small, gaudy splash of life in the sterile, monochrome world of Vincent's kitchen. It was a connection, a tether to a world outside these walls, a world where young women who worked for catering companies had arguments with their boyfriends and were careless enough to leave their phones behind. It was a symbol of a life that was messy and complicated and real. Everything my life was not. A strange, new, and deeply dangerous curiosity began to stir within me, a feeling I had not allowed myself to feel in years. It was the curiosity of a prisoner who suddenly sees a key lying just within reach. My hand, as if with a will of its own, reached out and picked it up. The phone felt warm in my palm, still holding the residual heat of its owner. As I lifted it, the screen lit up with a new notification. It was a text message. I told myself I should not look. It was a violation of a stranger's privacy. But a stronger, more desperate voice, the voice of a woman starving for any kind of information, any kind of connection, urged me on. My eyes fell upon the words on the screen. It was a wrong number text. A message sent to the caterer by mistake from a number I did not recognize. But the content of that message, the furious, accusatory words intended for some other poor woman in some other domestic drama, was a lightning bolt that struck the very foundation of my prison. The message read, "Don't you dare lie to me, Lisa. My mother warned me about women like you. She said you'd try to get my father declared incompetent just to get your hands on his money. I've already talked to his lawyer. It won't work." I read the words once, then twice, my mind struggling to process the accidental, impossible relevance of what I was seeing. Declared incompetent. Get your hands on his money. These were not just the angry words of a stranger. They were a blueprint, a roadmap of a strategy, a name for the formless, creeping dread I had been living with for years. I had thought my situation was a unique and personal tragedy, a twisted form of my son's love and control. I had believed it was a family matter, a quiet, shameful secret to be endured. But this message, this accidental spark in the darkness, revealed the truth. This was not just a family problem. It was a pattern, a known, recognized, and apparently common form of abuse. A form of abuse that had a name, that had lawyers, that had a defense against it. For the first time in 5 years, I felt a flicker of something other than fear or despair. It was a fragile, unfamiliar, and yet incredibly powerful feeling. Hope. The hope was not that I could be rescued. The hope was that I could rescue myself. I had been a social worker for 40 years. I had spent my life navigating systems, understanding the language of bureaucracy, and fighting for the vulnerable. I had been a warrior for others, but I had completely forgotten how to be a warrior for myself. Vincent had so thoroughly convinced me that I was a weak, frail, and burdensome old woman that I had come to believe it. He had gaslit me into forgetting the formidable, intelligent, and capable woman I had once been. This text message, this random cosmic accident, was a mirror, and in it, I saw not the diminished, ghostly creature I had become, but the reflection of the woman I used to be, a woman who knew how to fight. The key to the cage was not love, or pity, or the hope that my son would change. The key was information. The key was the law. I looked at the phone in my hand, this cheap, glittery piece of plastic, and I saw it for what it was. It was a weapon, and I knew, with a certainty that was a revelation in itself, that I had to use it. The quiet, submissive prisoner was gone, and in her place, a strategist was beginning to emerge. The words on the phone screen were a key, unlocking a part of my mind that had been dormant for 5 long years. The trained analytical mind of the social worker, the woman who had spent a lifetime identifying patterns of abuse and advocating for the powerless, suddenly and powerfully reawakened. My own situation, which I had viewed through the distorted, shame-filled lens of a personal familial tragedy, was instantly reframed. This was not a unique brand of my son's cruelty. This was a textbook case. Coercive control, financial elder abuse, a fraudulent attempt to gain conservatorship. The terms, which I now saw flashing on legal aid websites as I frantically, silently used the phone's internet browser, were not just jargon. They were a diagnosis. And a diagnosis, I knew, was the first step toward a cure. I sat on the cold, hard floor of the kitchen, hidden from the view of any windows, the borrowed phone a glowing rectangle of hope in my hands. I devoured every article, every legal forum, every heartbreaking story from other survivors that mirrored my own. I saw the patterns of my own life reflected in their stories. The isolation from family, the financial control, the slow, systematic erosion of a person's self-worth until they begin to believe they are the problem. For 5 years, I had believed I was the problem, that my presence, my needs were a burden that had transformed my loving son into a cold, cruel master. But now, in the reflected light of these other stories, I saw the truth. I was not the cause of his darkness. I was the victim of it. And the shame, the heavy, suffocating cloak I had worn for so long began to lift, replaced by a cold, clear, and righteous anger. I knew I had a very limited window of opportunity. The phone's battery was at 30%. The young woman from the catering company would soon realize her phone was missing. And Vincent, a man whose sleep was as light and as controlled as the rest of his life, would be awake in a few short hours. I had to act. I knew I couldn't keep the phone. That would be too risky, the evidence of my transgression too obvious, but I could use it. I could use this one, accidental crack in the walls of my prison, to gather a weapon, to send a message out into the world. My mind, now working with a speed and a clarity that felt like a resurrection, formulated a plan. I needed 2 things: irrefutable proof of his financial control and a way to get that proof to someone who could help. With the phone clutched in my hand, I slipped out of the kitchen and moved silently through the dark, sleeping house. Each step on the cold, polished concrete floor was a risk, each shadow a potential enemy. The house, his masterpiece of minimalist design, felt like a mausoleum, and I was a ghost, haunting it with a new and dangerous purpose. His home office was at the front of the house, its glass walls looking out into the perfectly manicured, moonlit garden. The room was a shrine to his success, dominated by a massive, imposing desk. I crept inside, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I knew what I was looking for. Vincent was meticulous. He kept all of his financial records in a locked, fireproof filing cabinet, but I had been his mother for 30 years. I knew that he was also a creature of habit, and he always left his most current, active files in a single leather-bound portfolio on his desk, ready for the next day. I found it, a sleek black portfolio, its very presence an arrogant assumption that no one would ever dare to look inside. My fingers, trembling slightly, opened the clasp. Inside was a series of financial statements, and there it was, the quarterly report for an investment fund titled the VC Sterling Trust. And under the list of assets, the first and largest entry was labeled Initial Capital Investment from the Estate of Clara Collins, my maiden name. The exact amount from the sale of my house down to the last penny was listed there, not as a fund I owned, not as an asset he was managing for me, but as a part of his own personal trust. It was the smoking gun, the clean, undeniable proof of his theft, disguised as a loving, sonly investment. I took the caterer's phone, my hands now surprisingly steady, and I took a series of clear, high-resolution photographs of the document. Then came the next step. Using the phone's browser, I created a new, anonymous, and encrypted email account. I composed a new message. The recipient was a name I had not spoken in years, the one person in the world I knew I could still trust. My youngest daughter, Sarah, a sharp, tenacious public interest lawyer in San Francisco. The subject line was 3 urgent words: I need help. In the body of the email, I attached the photographs of the financial document, and I wrote a single cryptic sentence. This is just the beginning. Don't call. Don't reply. Wait for my signal. I love you. I pressed send. A digital message in a bottle, a desperate flare sent out from my lonely, sinking island. The final phase was to cover my tracks. I meticulously deleted the photograph from the phone. I deleted the sent email. I logged out of the new email account and cleared the phone's entire browser history, leaving no trace of my frantic late-night research. I slipped back into the kitchen, my mission complete. I took the phone, wiped it clean of my fingerprints with a cloth, and gently placed it on the floor near the back door, as if it had been accidentally dropped by the young caterer on her way out. I retreated to my room, my heart still pounding, but with a new, wild and powerful rhythm. The sun was just beginning to cast a pale gray light on the horizon. The house was clean, the party was over, and the master was still asleep in his bed. But the world had fundamentally, irrevocably changed. The prisoner now had a weapon, the ghost had a plan, and the quiet, slow-burning fire of a rebellion had just been lit. The morning after the party was a masterpiece of calculated normalcy. I performed my duties with the quiet, submissive efficiency that Vincent had come to expect. I prepared his perfect, complicated breakfast. I cleaned the kitchen until it gleamed. I was the perfect ghost, the perfect servant. When he came downstairs, he found the caterer's phone sitting on the hall table exactly where a careless person might have left it. "Incompetent," he muttered, looking at the cheap, glittery object with disdain before calling the catering company to arrange for its return. He did not suspect a thing. In his mind, I was a known quantity, a solved equation, a creature whose behavior was as predictable as the sunrise. It was a fatal miscalculation. The days that followed were a new and terrifying kind of tightrope walk. I had to maintain the illusion of the broken, compliant woman he believed me to be, while my mind, now fully awakened and alive with a new, dangerous purpose, was a whirlwind of strategic planning. I was an actress, playing the most difficult role of my life. I had to be Clara, the prisoner, while secretly I was becoming Clara, the architect of an escape. Every moment was a risk. Every word, every gesture had to be carefully measured. My only connection to the outside world, my only hope, was a cryptic email sent from a stranger's phone, a digital flare shot into the darkness, and I could only pray that my daughter had seen it. I waited. For 5 long days, I went through the motions of my prison routine, my heart a constant low thrum of anxiety and a wild, unfamiliar hope. I tended my garden, my hands in the soil, the familiar, grounding work, a comfort in the storm of my uncertainty. I polished his silverware, I ate his scraps, and I waited. The signal when it came was so subtle, so perfectly integrated into the fabric of the modern world that it would have been invisible to anyone else. It was on the 5th day. I was serving Vincent his lunch when he was scrolling through one of his social media feeds on his phone. I glanced over, a casual, deferential glance, and I saw it. It was a public post from my daughter, Sarah. It was a picture of her golden retriever sitting in a field of flowers. The caption was what mattered. "Some beautiful things are worth fighting for." She had written, "Thinking of you, Mom. Time to start digging. Time to start digging." It was our code, a phrase from her childhood, from a time when we had planted a small, hopeful vegetable garden in the backyard of our old house. It was our secret signal, a confirmation sent across a continent. Message received. The investigation has begun. A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees washed over me. I was not alone. My daughter, my brilliant, tenacious, public interest lawyer daughter, was now my silent partner, my co-conspirator. The rebellion had its second soldier. Thousands of miles away, in her small, cluttered San Francisco apartment, my daughter went to work. As she later told me, my cryptic, terrifying email had been a call to arms. She too had been playing a role, the role of the loving, slightly distant daughter. Her conversations with me always stilted and strange under the watchful eye of Vincent. She had known something was wrong, had felt it in the hollow, performative quality of my voice, but she had never imagined the true, monstrous nature of my situation. My email with the damning financial document attached was the confirmation of her worst fears. She did not waste time on tears. She did what she did best. She started to dig. With the cool, methodical precision of a seasoned lawyer, she began to build a case, to map the architecture of Vincent's life, searching for a weakness, a flaw, a hairline crack in the foundation of his power that we could exploit. While I was playing the part of the perfect prisoner in Atlanta, she was becoming the perfect prosecutor in San Francisco. And Vincent, in his arrogant, absolute certainty of his own control, had no idea that the two women he had so profoundly underestimated were now quietly, patiently, and methodically planning his demise. With the knowledge that my daughter was now my silent, powerful ally, a profound shift occurred within me. The fear, which had been my constant companion for 5 years, did not vanish, but it was joined by a new, more powerful emotion, a cold, patient, and deeply satisfying rage. I had been a pawn in his game for too long. It was time to start playing a game of my own. My strategy would not be one of open confrontation. That would be foolish. A direct assault on a fortress that was still too well defended. My rebellion would be quiet, subtle, and insidious. I would use the very persona he had so carefully crafted for me, the frail, forgetful, and slightly senile old woman, as my most effective weapon. I would become the ghost in his perfect machine, the random, unpredictable variable in his otherwise flawless equation. My campaign began in the kitchen, the primary theater of my daily humiliation. That evening, I prepared his dinner, a beautiful piece of Chilean sea bass with roasted asparagus. I cooked it to perfection, and then, with a steady hand, I added just a little too much sea salt to the sauce, a small, almost imperceptible act of sabotage. I served him his meal as always in the silent, cavernous dining room. I retreated to the kitchen and waited. A few minutes later, I heard the sharp, angry scrape of his chair. He walked into the kitchen, his plate in his hand, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. "This is inedible," he said, his voice a low, menacing hiss. "It's drenched in salt." "Are you trying to poison me?" I looked up at him, my face a carefully constructed mask of wide-eyed, apologetic confusion. I summoned the image of a frail, doddering old woman, a role I had been rehearsing for years. "Oh my goodness," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Did I?" "Oh, Vincent, I am so sorry. My hands have been so shaky lately and my eyesight, it's just not what it used to be. I must have misread the container. My performance was flawless." He stared at me. His eyes narrowed, searching for a flicker of defiance, a hint of a lie. He found none. All he saw was the pathetic, incompetent old woman he believed me to be. His anger was thwarted, left with no target but my own supposed frailty. He let out a long, exasperated sigh, threw the plate into the sink with a loud clatter, and stormed out of the room. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. The acts of accidental incompetence escalated. The next morning, his specific, expensive, single-origin coffee beans were mistakenly ground on a coarse setting, ruining the flavor of his morning espresso. "My apologies, Vincent," I had said, my voice full of a practiced senile shame. "All these newfangled machines are so confusing." A few days later, the network router, which was located behind a large bookcase in the hall, was accidentally unplugged while I was dusting. He came home to a house that was digitally dead. His smart home system was offline, his music would not play, and most critically, he could not access his work servers. His rage had been a cold, terrifying storm that had lasted for hours, a storm from which I had weathered in my small gray room, a quiet secret smile on my face. He was a man who had built his empire on the concept of absolute control, and his own home, his own mother, was becoming a place of unpredictable, frustrating chaos. He was being tormented by the very weakness he had so carefully cultivated in me. I could see the toll it was taking on him. He became more watchful, his eyes following me as I moved through the house, a new sharp suspicion replacing his old, confident dismissal of me. He was searching for a pattern, for a sign of intent, but my performance was too perfect. I was simply the burdensome, deteriorating old woman he had always accused me of being. My one true act of rebellion, the one that was just for me, took place in the secret sanctuary of my garden. Amidst my practical food-bearing plants, I began to cultivate a new addition. It was a climbing rose, a variety known as the Zéphirine Drouhin, a beautiful, fragrant, and almost violently thorny plant. I tended to it with a fierce, loving devotion. I fed it. I watered it. And I watched as its thorny, defiant canes began to climb the back wall of the guest house. It was a quiet, symbolic act of defiance, a living testament to my own transformation. I, too, was learning to grow my own thorns. The psychological warfare was working. I was unsettling him, destabilizing the perfect, orderly world he had built, but I knew that these small acts of domestic terrorism were not enough. I needed to escalate. The final proof of my success and the signal of his growing paranoia came on a Thursday afternoon. I saw a small, discreet van from a home security company parked on the street. Later that day, while he was out, I found it. A new, tiny, almost invisible security camera hidden in the smoke detector in the kitchen. He was spying on me now, in my own kitchen. A desperate, pathetic attempt to regain the control he felt slipping through his fingers. He had just handed me a new and even more powerful weapon. For he was not the only one who could watch. The discovery of the hidden camera in the kitchen smoke detector was not a violation. It was a gift. It was the ultimate confirmation that my quiet, psychological campaign was working. Vincent, the master of control, the man who prided himself on his cool, detached rationality, was becoming paranoid. He was so unnerved by the small, unpredictable acts of my supposed incompetence that he had resorted to the desperate, clumsy tactic of electronic surveillance. He thought he was watching a prisoner. He had no idea that he had just handed the prisoner the keys to the entire panopticon. I now knew that my every move in the kitchen, my every word was being watched and recorded. And that meant the kitchen was no longer a prison. It was a stage. And I was about to give the performance of a lifetime. My first priority was to communicate this new, critical piece of intelligence to my daughter. I knew Vincent monitored my phone and my computer, so any digital communication was out of the question. I had to use a method from an older, pre-digital world, a world of secrets passed by hand. The next morning, on my bi-weekly trip to the artisanal bakery across town to procure Vincent's ridiculously expensive bread, I put our contingency plan into action. The owner of the bakery was a woman named Maria, a woman whose small business I had helped save from bankruptcy years ago, long before I had retired. Her loyalty to me was absolute. I went to the counter and, along with my payment, I passed her a small sealed envelope. Inside was a short, simple note for my daughter. "He has eyes in the kitchen. The time is now. Find the weakness." Maria simply nodded, slipped the note into her pocket, and later that day, as we had arranged, she scanned and emailed it to Sarah from the secure privacy of her own office. The message was received. In San Francisco, Sarah, my brilliant legal warrior, intensified her attack. She spent 2 days in a deep, focused dive into the intricate, labyrinthine world of Vincent's corporate and financial holdings. And then she found it. The fatal weakness. The hairline crack in the foundation of his empire. Vincent's company was in the final stages of securing a massive $50 million round of venture capital funding. The entire deal hinged on one man. A reclusive, old-money billionaire investor named Marcus Thorne, a man who was notoriously risk-averse and a public advocate for family values and ethical corporate governance. Sarah discovered that Thorne had a zero-tolerance policy for public scandals involving the executives of the companies he invested in. Any hint of personal or legal impropriety, and he would pull his funding without a second thought. Thorne was Vincent's Achilles heel, and we now had the arrow. The plan was set, the trap was laid. All it required was a final masterful performance from me. The next afternoon, knowing that Vincent would be in his home office, his eyes glued to the live feed from the kitchen camera, I staged my phone call. I called my oldest and dearest friend, Martha, another retired social worker who had been fully briefed on her role. I began the call by weeping, a quiet, desperate, and utterly convincing performance of a woman at the end of her rope. "Oh, Martha, I just don't know what to do," I sobbed, my voice trembling as I paced the kitchen, ensuring I was in full view of the camera. "It's Vincent. He's under so much pressure with this new business deal. This new investor, a Mr. Thorne. He's so important." I let my voice drop to a conspiratorial, senile whisper. "And I think, oh God, I think I've done something terrible." I was trying to email Sarah, about my legal situation, and I think I might have sent it to Mr. Thorne by mistake. His email was right next to hers in Vincent's contacts. I'm so old and so stupid with these computers. I've ruined everything for my son. From his office, Vincent would have seen and heard the entire pathetic performance. His senile, incompetent mother, a woman he kept as a prisoner, had just accidentally, foolishly, and catastrophically torpedoed his $50 million funding deal. The reaction I knew would be instantaneous. It would not be compassion. It would be pure, unadulterated panic. His first and only instinct would be to protect himself, to protect his deal. I finished my call with Martha and retreated to my room, my heart pounding with a thrilling, terrifying sense of power. My part was done. Now, I just had to wait for him to take the bait. I didn't have to wait long. A few minutes later, I heard the frantic, panicked sound of his voice from his office. He was on the phone, his voice a tight, strained, and overly casual thing. "Marcus, my friend," I heard him say, his voice full of a false, desperate bonhomie. "Just calling to check in. I know you got an email from my mother's account. A complete misunderstanding. She's been very confused lately. We're managing her health as best we can. Please disregard anything you may have received." I leaned against my door, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. He had taken the bait. He had just, without any prompting from us, created a bizarre and incriminating digital trail. A series of panicked calls and emails to his most important investor, trying to do damage control for a problem that did not exist. He was trying to preemptively discredit his confused mother, a woman who had, in his mind, just made a terrible, senile mistake. He had no idea that the confused old woman was a puppeteer, and he, the master of the universe, was the puppet, dancing on the end of her invisible strings. The tripwire was set. The trap was about to spring. The days following my staged, tearful phone call were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Vincent, now convinced that his senile mother had accidentally jeopardized his life's work, was a man consumed by a frantic new anxiety. The change in him was palpable. His usual cold, detached control was replaced by a brittle, hyper-vigilant paranoia. He watched me constantly, his eyes narrowed with a new, contemptuous suspicion. He was searching for any further signs of my supposed mental decay, any hint that I might cause another accident. He would ask me simple questions, and then demand I repeat the answer an hour later, trying to catch me in a moment of forgetfulness. He had doubled down on his belief in my incompetence, never once considering the possibility that he was the one being played. I, in turn, played my part to perfection. I was more forgetful, more frail, more pathetically apologetic than ever before, all while my heart beat with the steady, thrilling rhythm of a general watching her enemy walk directly into a perfectly laid ambush. While I was managing the front lines in Atlanta, my daughter, my brilliant general, was preparing the final decisive strike from her command center in San Francisco. Armed with the knowledge of Vincent's panicked, incriminating calls to his lead investor, Sarah drafted a letter. It was not a weapon of overt aggression, but one of quiet, surgical precision. It was written on the formal letterhead of her public interest law firm, addressed directly to the notoriously private and deeply principled billionaire, Marcus Thorne. The letter was a masterpiece of legal understatement. In calm, professional, and deeply concerned language, Sarah introduced herself as the daughter of Clara Collins and the attorney now representing her mother's interests. She explained that she had recently become aware that her mother, a retired and vulnerable senior, was the victim of a long-term and escalating campaign of financial and psychological abuse at the hands of her son, Vincent. She mentioned with grave concern that they had uncovered evidence of his intent to fraudulently gain conservatorship over their mother's estate, and then she delivered the killing blow. "What is most concerning to us, Mr. Thorne," she wrote, "is Mr. Collins's increasingly erratic and paranoid behavior. We have evidence, which we would be prepared to present to the proper authorities, that he has been making a series of bizarre and frantic communications to you and your office, attempting to preemptively discredit his own mother. We are deeply concerned not only for our mother's safety, but also for the stability and ethical governance of a company in which you are considering a significant investment." She did not make demands. She did not issue threats. She simply, professionally, and devastatingly expressed her concern. She attached as a primary exhibit the digital records of Vincent's own panicked emails and a log of his frantic phone calls. She had taken his own weapon, his own paranoia, and turned it back on him. The letter was sent via a bonded courier, a silent, ticking time bomb dispatched to the heart of Vincent's empire. Vincent spent the next 2 days in a state of self-congratulatory relief, believing he had successfully contained the fallout from his mother's senile mistake. He had spoken to Marcus Thorne's assistant, a man with whom he had a cordial relationship, and had spun a masterful tale of his mother's deteriorating mental state and his own loving and patient struggle to manage her affairs. The assistant had been sympathetic, and Vincent was confident that the $50 million deal, the crowning achievement of his career, was secure. He even felt a flicker of a dark, twisted pity for me. The poor, confused old woman, a danger to herself and to others. It was a narrative that soothed his ego and reaffirmed his own sense of absolute control. The call that detonated his world came on a Friday afternoon. He was in his corner office, looking down at the city below, a king surveying his kingdom, when his private line rang. The caller ID read Marcus Thorne. Vincent answered, a smooth, confident smile already on his face, ready to receive the final confirmation that the funding had been approved. The voice on the other end of the line was not the warm, collegial tone of a new business partner. It was a voice as cold and as hard as a block of ice. Collins, Thorne began, dispensing with any and all pleasantries. I have a letter on my desk. It's from a public interest law firm in San Francisco. It's on behalf of your mother, Clara Collins. The blood drained from Vincent's face. His confident smile froze and then dissolved. Marcus, I can explain, he began, his voice suddenly losing its easy authority. My mother, as I mentioned, she's been very— Don't, Thorne snapped, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Don't you dare insult my intelligence by repeating the pathetic, self-serving lies you have been feeding to my assistant. I have also been forwarded copies of your own, panicked emails to my office. Let me read one back to you, shall I? My mother has been very confused lately. Please disregard any unusual communications. You tried to play me for a fool, Collins. You tried to poison the well, to discredit your own mother before I could even learn of the horrifying situation you have subjected her to. Vincent was speechless, his mind reeling, the trap he had never even seen now springing shut around him with a brutal metallic snap. The letter, Thorne continued, his voice a blade, contains credible and frankly sickening allegations of long-term financial and psychological abuse. It contains evidence that you have stolen her life savings and are actively conspiring to have her declared mentally incompetent. And it contains your own bizarre and now deeply incriminating emails which serve as a perfect confirmation of your guilty conscience. Thorne paused, and in the silence, Vincent could hear the sound of his own empire crumbling. My firm's offer of funding is withdrawn, effective immediately. Furthermore, a full copy of this letter and all of your related correspondence is being forwarded to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Georgia state authorities for a full and immediate investigation into your business practices and your criminal treatment of your mother. Do not, he finished, his voice a final damning verdict, ever contact me or my office again. The line went dead. Vincent stood there, the receiver still pressed to his ear, a dial tone buzzing in the profound, ringing silence of his office. The $50 million deal was not just on hold, it was dead. His company, his life's work, was now the subject of a federal investigation. His reputation, the carefully crafted facade of the brilliant, ethical, self-made man, was about to be incinerated in a public firestorm. And it was all her fault, his mother, his stupid, senile, and now dangerously destructive mother. In his panicked, shattered mind, her quiet, senile incompetence had somehow impossibly morphed into a cunning, malicious act of sabotage. He left his office, a man possessed by a rage so absolute it was a form of madness. He drove home, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his mind a black storm of fury and a desperate, clawing need to reassert the control he had so completely lost. He would confront her. He would break her. He would make her take it all back. He burst through the front door of his house, his key scraping uselessly against the lock. Clara, he roared, his voice a raw animal sound of pure, unadulterated fury. Where are you? He expected to find me cowering in my small gray room, the place where he had confined me. He expected to find a frightened, weeping old woman he could bully into submission. He stormed through the silent, minimalist hall and into the main living area. And then he stopped. I was not in my room. I was sitting calmly and quietly in the center of the room, in his favorite black leather armchair, a place I had not been allowed to sit in for 5 years. I had a book open in my lap, and I looked up at his furious, explosive entrance with a look of cool, quiet, and utterly unimpressed appraisal. The power dynamic, the entire emotional architecture of our lives had, in that single, silent moment, completely and irrevocably inverted. The prisoner was on the throne, and the king was about to be brought to his knees. Vincent stood in the entryway of his own home, a man undone. His face was a mask of disbelief, which quickly curdled into a raw, unrestrained fury. The cool, detached master of the universe was gone, and in his place was a cornered, wounded animal ready to lash out. "What have you done?" he roared, his voice a ragged, ugly sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. He stormed towards me, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. "You senile, meddling old fool, you've destroyed me. You've ruined everything I've ever worked for." He stood over me, his large frame casting a long, menacing shadow. The old me, the woman who had lived in the shadow of his moods for 5 long years, would have flinched. She would have shrunk back into the chair, making herself small, trying to appease his rage with her own submission. But I was not that woman anymore. I did not move. I simply looked up at him from his own armchair, my gaze calm, steady, and devoid of fear. I let him vent his impotent fury, his tirade of accusations and blame washing over me like a harmless wave. He was a storm, but I was no longer a ship to be tossed about. I was the bedrock, unmovable and unyielding. When his rage finally exhausted itself, when he was left panting, his face red, his expensive suit rumpled, I finally spoke. My voice, in the ringing silence that followed his shouting, was a quiet, almost gentle thing, but it held the unshakable weight of absolute truth. "I have done nothing, Vincent," I said, my voice as calm and as clear as a winter morning. "Nothing?" he scoffed, his voice dripping with a bitter, hysterical disbelief. "You called my lead investor. You fed him a pack of lies. You destroyed my company." "No," I said, and I slowly, deliberately closed the book that was resting in my lap. "I did not call your investor. I have not spoken a word to anyone." I looked at him, and for the first time I allowed a small, pitying smile to touch my lips. "I didn't have to. You did all the work for me." The story I told my friend on the phone, the accidental email, it was a performance, Vincent, a play. A play I wrote for an audience of one. You. I knew your paranoia, your desperate need to control everything, would not allow you to ignore it. I knew you would not be able to resist the urge to manage the situation. And so you did. I leaned forward slightly. You were the one who called him. You were the one who created a bizarre, incriminating paper trail trying to preemptively discredit me. I simply created a scenario where your own character, your own fatal flaws, would be your own undoing. You have not been ruined by a senile old woman, Vincent. You have been ruined by yourself. The truth of my words, the sheer, elegant, and devastating simplicity of my trap seemed to suck the very air from his lungs. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, his mind finally, belatedly, comprehending the full staggering extent of how completely he had been outplayed. The woman he had seen as a weak, incompetent pawn had been the queen all along, and she had just maneuvered him into a perfect and inescapable checkmate. "And now," I continued, my voice still quiet, still calm, "we are going to discuss the terms of your surrender." I stood up from his chair, no longer a guest in his space, but the new, rightful owner of it. I laid out my ultimatum, my demands, the non-negotiable price of his own survival. "First," I said, "my money. The full and complete assets of the VC, Sterling Trust, which you created with my life savings, will be immediately and irrevocably signed over to a new trust, a trust of which my daughter, Sarah, is the sole trustee. You will relinquish all legal and financial control over me and my assets, effective immediately. Second," I said, "this house, this beautiful, cold prison, it is no longer your home. You will sign the deed over to me. It is a small partial repayment for the years of my life you consumed within its walls. You will pack a single personal bag and you will leave. Tonight. And third," I concluded, "you will get help. You will check yourself into a residential therapy program to deal with your profound issues with control, with anger, with whatever dark and broken thing inside you turns love into a cage. You will do the hard, painful work of becoming a better man. Not for me, but for yourself." He stared at me, a look of pure, sputtering hatred in his eyes. "You're insane," he hissed. "I will never agree to that." "Oh, I think you will," I said, and I played my final winning card. "You see, you have a choice, Vincent. You can agree to my terms, and in return, I will instruct my daughter to send a second, clarifying letter to Mr. Thorne, a letter explaining that this has all been a tense but now fully resolved family matter, an unfortunate misunderstanding. Your investigation may be called off, your deal may be salvaged, you might be able to save your company." I let that hope hang in the air for a moment before delivering the alternative. Or you can refuse. And I will send Sarah a second, much shorter email. The subject line will be release the file, and she will send everything we have: the forged medical documents, the conservatorship petitions, your financial records, your entire ugly conspiracy, not just to Mr. Thorne, but to the SEC, the IRS, and every major news outlet in this city. You will not just lose your funding, Vincent. You will lose your company, your reputation, and very, very likely your freedom. I stood before him, the quiet, powerless, and invisible old woman, and I held the fate of his entire world in the palm of my hand. He looked at me, at the woman he had so completely and catastrophically underestimated, and he finally, truly saw me. He was trapped, he was defeated, and he had absolutely no one to blame but himself. The silence in the room stretched, thin and taut, a high-tension wire pulled to its breaking point. Vincent stood before me, a man on a precipice, the ruins of his life laid out at his feet. I could see the war raging in his eyes. The pride, the arrogance, the lifetime of unshakable self-belief, all of it was battling against the cold, hard, and undeniable reality of his own destruction. He looked at me, at the woman he had so easily dismissed as a piece of aging, irrelevant furniture, and he saw finally the architect of his demise. He had a choice: a spectacular public immolation of his career and his freedom, or a quiet private surrender of his kingdom. For a long, agonizing moment, I thought his pride might win. I saw his jaw clench, a flicker of the old defiant rage in his eyes. But then I saw it break. It was not a sudden, dramatic shattering, but a slow, quiet crumbling, like a great stone edifice finally succumbing to the relentless, patient pressure of time. The fight went out of him. The rage was replaced by a hollow, empty resignation. He had been outplayed. He had been defeated. And he knew it. "All right," he whispered, the word a ragged, defeated exhalation, the sound of a king abdicating his throne. "You win." I did not smile. I did not feel a surge of triumph. I simply felt the quiet, clean satisfaction of a complex problem being resolved. "This is not a game, Vincent," I said, my voice calm and steady. "There are no winners or losers. There are only consequences." I pointed to the phone on the table. "You will make the calls now, to your lawyer, to your banker. You will authorize the immediate and irrevocable transfer of the full assets of the VC Sterling Trust to the new trust my daughter has established. Then you will instruct your lawyer to draft the documents to sign the deed of this house over to me. You will do this now, while I watch." He moved like a man in a trance, his movements slow and robotic. He made the calls, his voice a dead, emotionless monotone as he spoke the words that dismantled his own empire. He was signing away my money, my house, my freedom, all back to me. It took less than an hour. When he was finished, he stood in the middle of the living room, a ghost in his own life, a man who had, in the space of a single afternoon, lost everything. "Now," I said, my voice leaving no room for negotiation, "you will go upstairs. You will pack one bag, only your personal effects. Everything else, the clothes, the art, the monuments to your own ego, you will leave behind. You have 30 minutes. He did not argue. He simply turned and walked up the stairs, a man defeated. I sat in his armchair, my armchair now, and I listened to the quiet sounds of him packing away the remnants of his life in this house. 30 minutes later, he came back down the stairs, a single leather duffel bag in his hand. He walked to the front door. Then he paused, his hand on the knob. He turned and looked at me one last time, his face a hollow mask of a man I no longer knew. I thought he might say something, a final parting shot of anger or a last desperate plea for mercy, but he said nothing. He simply opened the door, walked out, and closed it quietly behind him, leaving me at last, alone in the magnificent, silent, and finally free House of Clara. For the first 24 hours after Vincent left, I did nothing. I simply walked through the vast, silent rooms of my new house, my house, and I let the silence wash over me. It was a strange and unfamiliar feeling. The house, for 5 years, had been his fortress, his showroom, a space where every object, every surface, was a testament to his control and my invisibility. Now, it was just a space. A beautiful, empty, and quiet space that was waiting for a new story to be written within its walls. The house was free. And so was I. On the second day, I began the work of the exorcism. I did not want to live in the museum of Vincent's ego. I needed to erase him, to reclaim the very air he had once breathed. I called a high-end estate liquidation company. A team of efficient, discreet professionals arrived the next morning. My instructions were simple and absolute. I want everything removed. The furniture, the art, the rugs, the electronics, everything. Sell what you can, and donate the rest to a shelter for domestic abuse survivors. The lead appraiser looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and professional curiosity at the millions of dollars of assets I was casually dismissing. I simply gave him a calm, quiet smile. They were not my assets. They were the props from a life that was no longer mine. For 2 days, I watched as they carefully dismantled Vincent's world, carrying out the cold, minimalist sofas, the aggressive, abstract art, the soulless, technological gadgets. They left the house completely, beautifully, and gloriously empty, a blank canvas waiting for a new artist. When they were gone, I walked through the echoing empty rooms. I threw open every window, letting the warm, fragrant Atlanta air circulate, chasing out the last lingering ghost of his cold, sterile presence. The house was no longer a prison. It was a promise, a future waiting to be built. That weekend, my daughters came home. Sarah, my brilliant warrior daughter from San Francisco, arrived first. The moment she saw me standing in the doorway of the vast empty house, her face broke into a look of such profound love and relief that it brought tears to my eyes. We held each other for a long time, no longer a mother and a daughter forced to communicate in secret, desperate code, but as two strong women, partners who had fought a quiet, desperate war and had won. My oldest daughter, Maya, a kind-hearted and gentle schoolteacher from Chicago, arrived a few hours later, and our reunion was a joyful, tearful, and healing balm on the wounds of the last 5 years. And then the three of us began the joyful work of turning a house back into a home. We spent a week in a happy, chaotic whirlwind of activity. We painted the cold gray walls in warm, vibrant shades of saffron, of deep ocean blue, of a soft, creamy white. We went shopping, not in the cold, exclusive showrooms Vincent had favored, but in bustling, eclectic antique shops and cozy, independent furniture stores. We bought a large, deep, comfortable sofa you could sink into, a worn Persian rug with a rich, complicated history in its threads, and a big, round, rustic dining table, a table meant for laughter and long, lingering conversations. The house, which had been so silent, was now filled with the sound of our chatter, of music, of the easy, overlapping joy of a family that was finally, truly reunited. One afternoon, Sarah, the lawyer, sat down with me at our new rustic table, a laptop, and a thick folder of documents between us. It was the full accounting of the VC, Sterling Trust, the fund Vincent had created with my life savings, which was now, after a series of swift and satisfying legal maneuvers, under her complete and total control as the trustee. "Mom," she said, her voice full of a quiet, profound awe, "I don't think you ever really understood. Vincent wasn't just investing for you. He was a very, very good investor. It's not just the money from your old house. It's a significant fortune." She turned the laptop towards me. The number on the screen, the number that was entirely, indisputably mine, was staggering. I looked at the number, at the long string of zeros, and I felt not a giddy, childish excitement, but a deep, quiet, and profound sense of power. It was the power of absolute, unassailable independence. It was the power to never be helpless again. The first thing I did with that power was to instruct Sarah to establish a new charitable foundation, a foundation dedicated to providing legal and financial aid to other victims of financial elder abuse. The second thing I did was to book 3 first-class open-ended tickets to Italy, a trip I had always dreamed of taking with my daughters. I looked at them, my 2 beautiful, strong, and loving children in this house that was now filled with light and laughter. The ghosts had been banished. The prison had been transformed into a sanctuary, and I was, at long last, the queen of my own beautiful castle. 2 years passed, each one a quiet, healing season in the new life I had built. The house, once a cold monument to my son's ambition and my own invisibility, was now a warm, vibrant, and joyful home, its rooms filled with laughter, with the scent of flowers from my garden, and with the easy, comfortable presence of a family. Built on a foundation of honest, hard-won love. I had traveled. I had reconnected with old friends, and I had poured my energy and my newfound resources into the foundation I had established, turning the pain of my own experience into a powerful tool for helping other women escape the quiet, desperate prisons of their own. My life was full, not with the frantic, hollow energy of my past, but with a deep, quiet, and profoundly satisfying sense of purpose. The final quiet resolution to the most painful chapter of my life arrived on a cool, clear autumn afternoon. I was in the kitchen with my daughters, Sarah and Maya, the three of us engaged in the happy, chaotic ritual of baking an apple pie for my grandson's birthday. The house was filled with the warm, sweet scent of cinnamon and the sound of our laughter. It was in the midst of this perfect domestic peace that Sarah, my lawyer daughter, my warrior, handed me a letter. "It came to my office," she said, her expression quiet and gentle. "It's from the Therapeutic Institute in Oregon. It's about Vincent." My heart gave a small, familiar pang, a muscle memory of an old wound. For 2 years there had been a profound and absolute silence from him. It was a silence I had demanded, and a silence he had, to his credit, respected. I took the letter, my hand steady, and opened it. It was a formal clinical report from the Institute's director, informing me that Vincent Collins had successfully completed their 2-year residential program. It spoke of his profound psychological transformation and his unflinching commitment to taking accountability for his past actions. Tucked inside the official letter was a smaller, sealed envelope with a single word written on the front in a handwriting I recognized as my son's: Clara. I walked out onto the back porch, the letter in my hand, and sat on the comfortable wicker chair that now occupied the spot where I used to tend my secret garden. I opened it. The note inside was short, the words simple and stripped of all of his former arrogance, of all manipulation. "Mom," it began, and the use of that simple childhood name was a quiet, heartbreaking acknowledgement of everything he had thrown away. "I am writing this not to ask for your forgiveness, as I know I have no right to it. I am writing this to thank you. You did not just save me from the foster care system when I was a boy. You saved me from myself 2 years ago. The lesson you taught me was a brutal one, but it was a necessary one. It was the only thing that could have shattered the monstrous ego I had built around myself. I am in a new city now," he continued. "I have a small apartment and a simple, quiet job. I am continuing my therapy. I am learning day by day what it means to be a good man, not just a successful one. I know I can never be a part of your life again. I have accepted that. That is the price of what I did. My only hope, my only prayer, is that you are happy and that you are at peace. You deserve it more than anyone I have ever known. Goodbye, Vincent." I folded the letter and looked out at my garden, which was now a sprawling, beautiful testament to my freedom. I felt not anger, not a surge of triumphant victory, not even the sharp, piercing pain of the past. All I felt was a quiet, profound, and sorrowful sense of closure. The boy I had saved, the brilliant, broken child I had pulled from the wreckage of the system, had, it seemed, finally begun the long, difficult work of saving himself. I would never see him again, and that was a grief I would carry with me always. But in his final, humble, and honest words, he had given me a gift. He had given me the hope that my initial investment in his soul, my belief in the good boy I had once seen, had not, in the end, been a total loss. I walked back into the house, into the warmth and the light and the laughter of my daughters. I looked at the beautiful, messy, and joyful life I had built from the ashes of my old one. I had been a prisoner in a gilded cage, a ghost in my own home. But that woman was gone. The woman who stood here now was the master of her own house, the matriarch of her own family, the author of her own happy ending. Freedom, I realized, was not just the absence of a cage. It was the presence of a life you had built, with your own 2 hands, on your own terms, a life filled not with the cold, hard currency of money and control, but with the warm, priceless, and enduring wealth of love and peace.